to today's expert webinar. My name is Div Bensali, and we're joined today by Randy Johnston, Chairman and CEO of K2 Enterprises, and he'll be giving his 2020 tech update. I want to thank you again for joining us today. Also with us is Tom Provine from our team at Accountants World. He'll be helping throughout the presentation as well. We're excited to have you on board. Wanted to remind you, if you are following along on social media, particularly Twitter, during the course of this presentation and want to tweet out anything that you find interesting or any questions you may have, you can use that hashtag in the bottom center there, hashtag expert webinar, and we'll be tracking along with you and happy to keep the conversation going there as well. A couple of quick administrative things before we turn this over to Randy. Tips for GoToWebinar. If you don't see the GoToWebinar control panel, just look for the orange arrow. That will allow you to expand or hide the panel. If you'd like to change your audio options, you can go back and forth between computer audio or phone call. Whichever one you go to select will then be instantly put into place for you. And if you select phone call, it'll provide you with a dial-in number and an access code as well, so you can follow along. If you have any questions for Randy during the presentation, just expand the question section, type your question, and remember to click send to make sure that it comes across to us. Randy will be answering questions during our poll breaks or at the end of the presentation. And finally, if you haven't downloaded his handout yet, that's available under the Handouts tab. There's a PDF in there, and you can download that directly from there. Today's event is the second in the 2020 Expert Webinar Series, which is brought to you by Accountants World. We're featuring 13 thought leaders, including 7 of accounting today's most influential people in accounting, and they are going to be sharing their unique insights with one unified purpose to help you and your practice thrive. And I think particularly in current times, feeling like we're getting the most incisive current information and insights from people who are thought leaders throughout different aspects of the accounting industry and beyond, I think is more invaluable than ever. So if you haven't yet signed up for the entire series, you can simply go to 2020-webinars.com. So 2020-webinars.com. You'll be able to sign up for all of the remaining 11 webinars at one time, and then attend as many as you're able to. But we get great feedback from attendees on the quality of the presenters and the quality of the presentations, and we're excited to be able to bring this to you at no cost throughout the course of the year. So if you haven't yet signed up for those, please go ahead and do so. Also, just saw a question coming in: is CP being offered for this and future webinars? The answer is yes. Today's webinar does qualify for CPE, which we'll talk about in just a minute, and so do the remaining expert webinars as well. So speaking of CPE, the 3 things you need to do in order to get CPE: attend the live webinar for no less than 50 minutes, respond to all of the polling questions. There will be a total of 4, one of which is coming up in about 60 seconds here. And then finally, when we close out of the presentation today, you'll see a post-webinar survey pop up. Go ahead and fill that out and submit that. If you don't see it, no worries. We'll email it to you shortly afterwards as well, within 24 hours. After the webinar ends, and you can fill it out from there as well. Only need to fill it out one time. So if you fill it out online right after today's webinar, no need to fill it out from the email again as well. You'll receive a notification about your CP within 3 business days, so end of this week or early next week for that timing. So I know some of you like to, some of you get a little bit anxious if you don't see it in by tomorrow morning, so please bear with us and give us a little bit of extra time. We get a large audience for these, and it takes a while to process that. Last thing I'll mention in terms of CPE, please add webinar@accountantsworld.com to your trusted email list to make sure that emails from us come through to you. Also wanted to mention, we are on the verge of launching a new written guide on how to weather the storm and emerge stronger. And the basic premise behind this is, while so much of the world is in the midst of crisis and in the midst of panic about this crisis, we believe that there is actually a unique opportunity for accounting firms to help both themselves into the future and to help their clients as well. and that the needs of your clients have never depended on you more than they do at the current time. So we put together this guide and just about to publish it to basically show how you can bounce back from everything that's happened over the past couple of months, recover, but then also look forward, look towards the horizon, and really thrive for years to come. It'll require some reinvention of your practice. It'll require looking at your service offerings in a different way than you have up until now and presenting them differently to your clients as well. But we are confident that this can be a win-win for both you and your clients, and we're excited to share that with you. So what I'm going to do right now, this is a free guide, but I'm giving you guys the opportunity to be the first to sign up for it. So I'm going to launch a poll question. If you'd like to get this free guide, and again, there's no obligation here. It's simply a free PDF that will be emailed out to you. But if you would like to get that available to you, the first poll question is open in front of you. So simply indicate whether or not you'd like to receive it. So again, if you'd like to get the free guide from Accountants World, How to Weather the Storm and Emerge Stronger, please go ahead and select yes. If not, no worries. You can select no there. Make sure to click the submit button. A reminder that this is the first of 4 poll questions today that is required in order to earn CPE credit. So we'll go ahead and take about 10 to 15 seconds here for everyone to go ahead and vote. I see about 80% of you have already voted, but if you haven't done so and are looking to earn CPE credit today, please go ahead and get your vote in as well. All right, so we'll take 5 seconds for this poll question before we close it out. Going once, going twice. Okay, and thank you to the 79% of folks who said they would like to receive this. You'll get it in your email box probably sometime next week when it is completed. Just waiting for this to go. Okay, there we go. So before I turn it over to Randy Johnston, just a quick bio on him. He is the chairman and CEO of K2 Enterprises. He is a leading authority on where technology is heading, and most importantly, its impact on accounting firms. So yeah, over the years that I've known Randy, I've asked him a number of different technology questions, and he's always able to answer those questions capably. And his breadth of knowledge is really impressive in and of itself. But then the ability to tie that to how does that impact actual accounting firms on the ground, and what can they take away from that, I think is pretty unique and special. He's been selected as one of the top 25 thought leaders in accounting for 10 years running. And so without any further ado, it's my pleasure to turn things over to Randy Johnston.
Well, Div, thank you so much, and Tom, all your efforts for getting this set up today. And I'm very pleased to have all of you with me. And in our time together, we have lots to do, but I believe Div gave you a lot of the background on me. And I have included my email addresses in the presentation materials that you have downloaded. And Div, that Emerging Stronger sounds like something I'd like to read. Everything I've read that has been produced by you in Accountants World has been worth the time. And, you know, advisory work really heated up this year with the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, a lot of firms wound up converting from compliance to advisory work for that 30 or 60, 90 days. And as I reflect back on our conversations in January, we knew that advisory services were going to be big. I just didn't know it would be triggered by such an event this year. So I hope everybody in this group has remained healthy and safe and well. My phone number is also there. I answer the phone when I'm available. I don't have calls screened, but I always do start with a picture of the grandchildren. So here we go. And this is a recent event for our family. So all of my children and their spouses and the 7 grandchildren are there. Been hard on my wife to be isolated at home, not so much with me, but normally she gets to see 6 of those grandchildren every week, maybe twice a week. And the grandchild from New York, I got to see last on March 11th. So we may get to see them if they come out of New York during the summer. So anyway, we hope that technology allows you to do the things that you like most. I like spending time with my family most. So once I'm out of work, that's what I do. It turns out the recommendations in our presentation today are supported by my NMGI team. That group of about 35 people supports CPA firms 24/7 from Boston to Honolulu. So when I talk about a piece of technology working a certain way, you can count on it for that. As Div also laid out, our K2 business produces about 1,600 events a year in the US and Canada. The COVID-19 pandemic has converted us to more virtual rather than live, but very few cancellations for us. And we do have, this today counts one of those 1,600s. We do have websites available to support you. And because I've been at home longer than any time since 1993, so every day I'm home is one day longer in that record-setting trend, I've updated all these websites for current content. So CPA Firm Tech and Accounting Software World and Totally Paperless, all highly updated right now with current content. We've got YouTube videos for education, as well as our K2 site on some articles that we've written and the dates for other offerings. So we're going to talk about technologies in lots of ways, communications, and hopefully out of this you can come up with a good tactical plan. But I'm going to start with something really simple today. We recognize that blue light is aging skin, as it turns out. So if you sit for 4 8-hour days in front of a computer screen, it's the equivalent of 20 days of midday sun. It also can disrupt your sleep as well. So blue light, by the way, penetrates deeper into skin than UVA and UVB, according to dermatologist Stephanie Williams. So we know that Apple, for example, has put blue light filters in here, and we just want you to be aware that it's not only a sleep problem, it's also wrinkles. So I don't worry about the way I look as far as wrinkles go, but I think some people do. And, you know, we watch technology on all fronts, and we're going to be talking about technology acceleration, connectivity, security, some emerging technology. And as time allows, we'll do more on software, hardware, and strange but true, but depends on your questions how we'll move. The entire set of materials is included though, so you can review that. Back in the 70s, I came up with a concept, a structure that I used in the college textbooks that I wrote, talking about people, procedures, data, programs, and hardware that work together to produce information. And we still think this digital version of the truth is pretty strong. We believe that this year, the dominant technologies you should be using include, in the Microsoft way of doing things, Windows 10, Microsoft 365, which late in the presentation you'll recognize there's no longer an Office 365, it's Microsoft 365. We believe for accountants using i5s to i9s is still a pretty good approach, along with dedicated processors, and you can see the rest of the specs. If you happen to be an Apple Mac user, same type of thing, except Apple is introducing AMD processors into their product lines. They tend to either have a little lower or higher requirement of RAM, depending on the rest of your applications, and you tend to do a little more graphics work, so a little larger solid state drive we think is wise. But in the future, you know, we do see some resurgence now in Linux open source. Microsoft, of course, had acquired GitHub a few years back, and they're promoting it more now. And you'll often hear the phrase, you know, free as in speech or free as in beer. And with free open software, there are 4 rights that are considered with that. And we recognize that as you get more cloudified, Linux can give you better security and integrations in many ways. So oddly enough, that is making a resurgence right now. You may wind up with other suites of applications instead of Office 365, like G Suite or Zoho One, and you're going to run dominantly SaaS apps as this thing continues to progress. In hardware this year, we'll see new introductions with USB 4 and a new Wi-Fi 6 called Wi-Fi 6E. Understand that 5G rollouts are proceeding, but more slowly here in the US because of sanctions and other issues, but 5G is continuing to roll out around the world. We have some concerns about some of the new standards that the US is not participating in because of the current embargoes that are in place. So we're giving up some of our position globally as a standard setter. Of course, you know, today we're going to see a SpaceX live launch late this afternoon. I think it goes at 4:30 Eastern time. And SpaceX has been pushing up a lot of satellites, as it turns out, for their low Earth orbit satellites, and the payloads are pretty good, and I've got that included in the presentation. We'll talk a little bit about some of the smartphones and other things along the way. And that gets me to the first of 3 more review questions. So Div, back to you on this one.
Okay, we'll go ahead and launch the second poll question here. So folks, you should see it open in front of you in just a second. Which of the following statements is true for mainstream technologies? And so 4 options there, or 3 options plus all of the above. So go ahead and select one of those 4 options, and then make sure to click the submit button to ensure that your vote is counted towards earning CP credit today. Just a reminder, this is the second of 4 poll questions that will be given today. And voting in the poll questions is required in order to earn CP credit.
And Div, while we're given a chance to think about that, part of what I like to do with accounting firms and their clients in general is stay a little closer to mainstream technology. I think there's less risk. And so the key thing I'm trying to get you to think about here is which things are mainstream technologies today? Which one or ones?
Okay, great. So we are at about 86% of people having voted. We'll take about 10 more seconds here for folks to get their votes in. All right, going once, going twice. Okay, so Randy, we had 89% say all of the above, 9% said Microsoft Office.
Yep, understood. And I do believe that I would consider all of the above correct, because solid state drives and Intel are all mainstream technologies as well. So we do recognize how critical Microsoft Office is to the environment. Now, of course, many of you are just coming out from lockdown. I basically wound up in self-quarantine after being in New York City on March 11th. During this period, remote computing got a super heavy test. As it turns out, GoToMeeting, Zoom, Teams, all those things were overrun initially. Microsoft did a gorgeous job, though, of scaling up their resources between February and March. The workloads in Microsoft Azure increased 770%. They extended their Teams functionality for meetings. Slack extended theirs and so forth. It was quite the thing. But basically, we're still kind of in the thick of it. I actually captured this dashboard from the Johns Hopkins reporting, which I've followed pretty much since it was first published. In fact, I followed it beginning on day 1. And if we look at the May 3 numbers versus today's numbers earlier this week, and today we're headed into the 5.6 million class. And see, I captured this on the 21st. So we've still got a lot of the COVID around us, and that's going to be something we'll have to deal with for a long time. So I don't know if the impact of social distancing will be immediate or multi-year, but the processes will emerge, and we'll have to ask questions like what becomes an appropriate social greeting. I'm used to handshakes or hugs or whatever, and what are we going to do on that? And there are also a lot of volatile, uncertain, changing, and ambiguous things that are happening now. And that may replace our FUD, which certainly describes what's happening with technology as well. Now, technology itself, the pace is continuing to accelerate. A lot of vendors were intending to release new products post April 15th with the tax deadline change to July 15th. They delayed a lot of their announcements until the July timeframe. So there's going to be technology compression this year, in addition to the typical tax season compression, and we had an extension. It's just kind of a weird thing. Some of the most interesting solutions to that, though, is firms have decided to make their own deadline of June 1, so people could still have a summer. Other people noted that people that are traditionally late with taxes are traditionally late for July 15th too. So in any case, it is becoming, though, a lot more difficult to recognize technology options, let alone understanding how to adopt them. Monolithic systems are becoming a lot more common, and apps are supplementing systems to solve problems, and we need more integration with digital plumbing. So What's happening with simple apps, we're getting silos of data and each requires a learning. The support quality from vendor to vendor varies pretty widely. We get intermittent speeds, there's periodic issues that are hard to diagnose, and the users frequently don't understand how to connect the apps. And see what the app market looks like, in my mind, is kind of like Lego blocks. You have all these various available apps. What we wind up with, the final solution, may be pretty darn simplistic, when reality is we had expected quite something different, and we have to settle on something like this. See, apps can solve a lot of problems, but I find right now a lot of vendors are pulling things back together and offering many different solutions. Now, small organizations can look pretty big with this strategy. Many of you, 9% of you, said, Office 365, Microsoft 365 was strategic to you. And in fact, that's true. Team collaboration, email, document sharing, multi-documents, and so forth, I get it. The ability to do SaaS accounting or have vertical applications, payroll, AP, expenses, and so forth. And you have internet tools for web presence, social media marketing, and voice over IP systems and conferencing like Zoom. Big organizations can also be nimble, and we're seeing a lot of upgrades right now with SaaS tools. In public practice accounting, a lot of the vendors are rewriting their software into a SaaS type environment. Thomson's doing that with Onvio. CCH has been doing that with Access. The sponsor of today, Accountants World, has a complete suite, and I just reviewed them for my practice management offering. And again, a nice complete suite of systems. In general, remote access is getting to be higher performance and more reliable. We can license specialized systems for just a few users. And then there's also other collaboration tools for workflow like XCM or Zapier. And you've got portals and you've got video conferencing with Teams and Zooms. Well, as it turns out, data is driving a lot of this. And University of Cambridge economist Diane Coyle basically wanted us to think about data being everywhere and understanding the value of data and who benefits from it, and how we could focus on economic well-being versus the misuse of data. Things like medical records or phone locations or retail sales transactions for forecasting could be, good. And there's a lot of debate right now about who really owns data. And in fact, digital twins are becoming a lot more common. If you've attended these series through the years, you might remember in 2017, I talked about how GE was using digital twins for airline engines to get advanced notifications. And today, patients' hearts are being set up as digital twins. And we've got researchers in both Britain and the US that are working on this. And, as a lot of research has been thrown against COVID-19 and the clotting and all those cytokine storms and so forth, digital twins are going to become much more of a reality, I think, in this case. But I do want you to understand how the data economy is very unequal. Amazon, Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, Facebook, are all very profitable companies with a lot of data concentrated in them. And we see it globally in Asia with Alibaba and Tencent and Samsung, and to a lesser degree in other areas like Europe. But these data platforms, these big platforms, are not just monopolies, but they're monothoponies, meaning that they have the power to hold down wages for data labor, which is a pretty interesting concept. So, this kind of led me to this Dilbert comic, which I was published about the same day I was writing this slide. And you can see basically the comment: now that I'm managing the cloud, take some time to make some social changes. I'll transfer any remaining money from low income people to the rich. And of course, the comment, that feels wrong. He says, I'm just adding efficiency to the inevitable. I think there is a lot of transfer of wealth that's happening along these lines right now. And we saw some of the outcomes of that in the recent past. Well, in 2018, if you've attended these sessions, you remember we talked a lot about edge computing and using graphics processors. That's why today I still want you to have dedicated graphics processors in your Windows machines and your Macs, because it helps us with lots of different applications. Video rendering is minor, but also artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so forth. And it turns out Internet of Things will crunch even more data at the edge, and that forecast is to be up to 25 billion by 2025 from 11 billion in 2019. We think that Sam George from Microsoft, who leads their IoT business, believes that the amount of computing will be equally spread between the cloud and its edge by that time. So data is really becoming an AI assembly line. And I love that term. I wish I could pronounce it better. But it's clear that big boys like IBM and Oracle see this happening, as does Salesforce. And then other companies like MuleSoft and Tableau are playing here as well. Databricks and C3 AI and Click all have similar strategies. So I recognize that as accountants, many of you are dealing with smaller businesses. I want you to be aware that what's happened in these large businesses with AI will come down market, and that is not very far off. Further, alternative data from fintech is being raised as well. In late April, Comptroller General Gene Dodaro basically warned Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Board of Governors for Feds, that there was disparate use of data in analyzing loan qualifications. They were using AIs and robo-advisors, and they were also putting a lot of reliance on where investors should park their money. And there was some, insights into players like BlackRock and others, how they were playing with this. And they warned that there was an adverse impact on the economy, on lower income and minority consumers, probably emphasized even a little bit more now. And they were talking about why we needed to de-risk some of this data. So we want to watch data carefully because data is being used by law enforcement. An example here out of Florida with Zachary McCoy, he was basically just riding his bike around the neighborhood, but there was a crime committed where he was at, and his phone data made him a suspect, and he was served a geofence warrant and had to try to defend it within 7 days. Not a rich guy, just a restaurant worker, but just coincidentally and circumstantially was at the scene. By the way, he was completely innocent, it turned out. And see, data use is also in progress by law enforcement. And I believe because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the releases here in the last week by both Google on Android and Apple on iOS that now have contact tracing turned on. In fact, I looked at the contact tracing settings earlier this week just to make sure that they were off by default like they're supposed to be. This data use is increasing. Clearview AI has scraped information from public sources like Facebook, and they are using this for search, but not surveillance. And the intent here is to stop criminals and so forth. Now, it turns out the Royal Canadian Mounted Police used this for facial recognition in 15 child exploitation case. They helped rescue 2 kids. Great use of it. But here in the United States, it is also clear that there are laws against this type of tracing. So the Biometric Information Privacy Act out of Illinois clearly is caused a lawsuit, and that's drug Clearview and CDW into it. See, we're going to see a lot of this type of thing, but if you note, 600 law enforcement agencies in the US and Canada are using this technology. And again, you can say, is that a good thing or a bad thing? My purpose is to make you aware of it. Now, you also are aware that in the last, during the COVID-19 pandemic, when it was at its peak, Zoom bombing became pretty normal. In fact, Zooming became a new generic term. The ease of use of Zoom is very attractive. Unfortunately, the security on the back end of Zoom was not very well done. There was an update in early May, which didn't fix all of the security holes. Plus, the back end data was monetized and sold. Further, it was fairly easy to crash into Zoom meetings. And so our rule of thumb was only use Zoom for personal use and for things that are public. Kind of like if you think about the postal service, a postcard is public and a sealed letter is private. Well, use Zoom when you want to to send a postcard, use something like Teams if you want to send a letter. And staying on this idea of compliance in GPS data, you're going to find that there are going to be tracking entities around. Unicast is one that has tracked in most of the 50 states, and they actually track through cell phone usage. And, in this particular case, I'm from Kansas, so, I wanted to see Lee Norman is actually the name, sorry if I misspelled, that was using Unicast to gauge compliance of the COVID-19 stay-at-home compliance during COVID-19. Unicast is installed in a lot of free games, social media, and weather apps. So many of you are being tracked now, whether you know it or not, and I don't think you've actually been informed of it very well. Further, we think 2020 and beyond will be a time period of a lot of technology-assisted contact tracing, normally just called TACT, where we're dealing with testing and counseling and treatment and self-isolation. Some of these apps have already been deployed, like Singapore's Trace Together. We already know that Colorado, North Dakota, and Utah, as well as other countries like China, Israel, are playing in this, and Rhode Island has this. I don't know if this will become the norm, but we think it will because of Apple and Google's operating systems changes in the last week or so that have released their Bluetooth contact tracing. And these health apps may rule this post-virus life. Here is a view of the apps used in Wuhan, which basically show that red means you're infected, yellow means you've had a contact and need quarantine, and green means you're good to go. A local resident, Wu Shenzong, basically said, I feel safe using the app. But we already know that the Communist Party is using this big data to extend their surveillance and control in that province and others. So Oxford basically says other governments are going to try to adopt this and maybe should. Again, I'm not trying to sound political one way or the other. I just want you to be aware that because of the pandemic, security tracing is going to become very normal, and we're going to use these types of apps, and governments may mandate some of those, and it'll be a very odd period that way. So Div, I think we're up for question number 2.
All right, sounds great. So let me go ahead and get our poll question up here. So the question is, which of the following statements is true for data? 3 options and then a 4th option for all of the above. So please go ahead and select which one you believe to be true. Make sure to click the submit button so that your vote is registered. Just a reminder, this is the 3rd of 4 poll questions required today in order to earn CP credit.
So Div, I hope I'm not giving you wrinkles from sitting in front of computers too long, or wrinkles from being concerned about all this contact tracing and data use.
No, this is one of the things I appreciate is that you've got the information, but you also provide good context around it rather than sort of fear mongering. I think that's an appropriate sort of perspective to have on it here.
Well,
Dave, I just want to pardon me, guys. This is Tom Provine. I'm one of the other hosts on the webinar today. I just want to remind everybody we've had a couple questions come in regarding not being able to answer the poll questions. You need to exit out of full screen mode in order to answer the poll questions, or else it won't be registered. It's a glitch within GoToWebinar that we've contacted their support team about. So just a reminder just to exit out of the full screen mode, and then once the poll question is over, you can enter back into full screen mode. That's all. Just wanted to interject with that quickly.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks, Tom. Very much appreciated. And my bet is that if you think you've missed one of those, if you email the Accountants World team, that they'll help you with that too.
Sounds great. All right, we have had over 90% of people vote. We'll take 5 final seconds here. So if you haven't gotten your vote in, please go ahead and do so. Going once, going twice. Okay, so Randy, 82% of people said data can be used to model real world systems. 16% said all of the above.
Yeah, so as it turns out, I think the best of the answer is data can be used to model real world systems. And I want you to continue to think about these digital twins and this tracking and so forth. And by the way, digital exhaust, that's the data that comes out of systems. I think it has a lot of use. And it is unfortunately also being used for tracking in both good and bad ways right now. So just be aware that's what's happening. So, you might have
Randy,
already,
can
yes,
sorry, can I
absolutely.
just jump in for 1 second on the notion of digital exhaust?
Yes, sir.
Um, I saw an analysis recently that estimated that within the next 10 years, the amount of digital exhaust will be greater than the amount of source data that it's based on, because we are mixing and matching data in so many different ways. So all this other thing that we think of as you mentioned, exhaust or sort of the refuse that's coming out of valuable data is now going to be larger and potentially used for other purposes more so than the original data was based on.
Div, you're absolutely right. In fact, pre-COVID-19, there was estimates I saw that said maybe as early as 2022. Further, because I had to shorten the presentation today, I had a lot more data depth on some of these sources. And Internet of Things is going to produce an awful lot of this digital exhaust, but also things like credit card tracing and all sorts of things. Yes, we will actually have more digital exhaust than what I would call real data. And there is some concern that if you put digital exhaust together incorrectly, you actually make bad conclusions. And that's known as data fusion by name. And data fusion is actually fairly common in artificial intelligence products. So for example, Zoho's Zia, Zoho's intelligence assistant, has that capability of data fusion. Salesforce has that capability of data fusion. And what the vendors are trying to do is gather data points together. And I think you'd appreciate that from a marketing perspective. And once you have so many data points, you are more able to predict the behavior, and that is true with some of these political social media advertisers and so forth. This has become a pretty interesting science, and the amount of data being pushed is magnificent. So thank you for calling that out. Well, now you have probably already figured out, I still like to read the comics. So obviously Pickles I like a lot. And the main thing to see here is, the final frame, but notice the question, did you get a new phone, Grandpa? Yep, I finally decided to break down and get with the times. It's got blue teeth and air droop and super hyper retina delay and something called ultra wide waistband support. And he's pretty close on most of those terms, but obviously not there. And connectivity in mobile is a big deal. As I've mentioned, 5G is breaking through. This map is the T-Mobile map of 5G. It's really not quite that complete because in my mind, they don't do a pure 5G as T-Mobile. Of course, Huawei is still set aside from the order from last year for the Department of Commerce entity list problem. But 5G is being deployed globally, and even here in the US, it is still proceeding. And Ericsson is estimating that mobile networks alone will carry 160 exabytes of data by each month by 2025, which is 4 times the current amount. Now in 5G, the reason you hear me being fussy about this is 5G really runs in millimeter wave, 24 to 86 gigahertz. And then there's a mid-range frequency and a long-range frequency. And a lot of the long-range frequencies will be used indoors. The 2 to 6 gigahertz, the mid-range, will be used to provide coverage and capacity, but it's really only the high frequency stuff that is pure 5G. And vendors are mixing what they're talking about. So 5G coverage zones will be small and the reception may be iffy for quite some years here. And we are moving much more slowly right now, partially because of economic conditions and other factors, and I get that. But you have to understand that 5G technology in general is licensed by the FCC. Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile have all bought different bandwidths. And when everything's said and done, part of the reason that the T-Mobile Sprint merger occurred was so that the combined company would have access to all 3 of the frequencies like their competitors of AT&T and Verizon currently have. So it winds up being a little more complex sounding than it really is. But today, you can buy 5G service from all of the major carriers, but they're quite different in terms of what they provide. So generally, Verizon maps in pure 5G provide the best value and performance. And T-Mobile, even though they show this magnificent coverage everywhere map, they're really doing kind of a pseudo 5G. So just beware, but the main next thing I need you to know is for 5G, you're going to have new cell phone equipment. Now, of course, the FAST plan was promoted here in the US, and the idea is to ramp up the investment by US technology companies to create a competitive product to the Huawei offerings. So you'll kind of watch how that comes out. And that's still held through all the COVID-19 pandemic situation. Now, the Apple Watch Series 5 has some great features, but Watch 6 is not very far away. So if you're thinking about a new Apple Watch in your future, I'm going to ask you to defer for Apple's new capability there. And of course, as we get ready to convert over into the iPhone 12s from the 11 families, we'll start to see, I believe, the 5G release in the Apple line as well. Now, of course, you can buy 5G equipment today with Samsung and the S20 family, and you can see the prices that are here. And yes, if you buy a 5G phone or a 5G hotspot, it is backwards compatible with the prior products. And likewise, I expect to see a new generation Pixel, but the Pixel 4 is the current offering here. So tablets in general are becoming more usable. The iPad Pro is now a lot more like a computer. Of course, the iPad OS has now got native mouse support. We're seeing some Android tablets that are ruggedized and inexpensive that can be dropped safely. We expect to see Microsoft release a Surface tablet called the Neo in the fourth quarter. And, in your particular case, you may even combine these with 4K TVs and wind up with a wireless keyboard and mouse and have another usable surface like this. So for iPad family, the mini iPad Air and Pro are all in their family, and I've listed the prices here. Again, in this one, we expect successor technology in the not too distant future. So just be aware that the iPad upgrades have really made these more like a computer, and that's really the point here. And also, we've been following what Google's been doing with their Pixel Slate. It's a very nice little product, very iPad-like, and if all you're doing is web surfing, email, and that type of thing, you're just as well off, we think, on an Android tablet as you are on an iPad. We don't know the price of the Microsoft Surface Neo, but we do know that it's intended to have a dual 9-inch screens which flip out to this 13-inch format and run off the ARM chip. That's at least the current thinking on it. So I think, Div, we're ready for maybe question number 3 here.
Okay, sounds great. So folks, you should see your final poll question in front of you right now. Question is, which of the following statements is true regarding 5G? 3 options there, plus a 4th one for all of the above. And so please go ahead and select the option that you believe is most accurate. Make sure to click the submit button so that your vote is counted.
Yeah, and as you're considering this, just a reiteration, if you're in the areas that have 5G service, it's phenomenal. I have used it enough to tell you, wow. And part of what we're trying to get you to do is think about what your future is going to be like here. And it has been projected that there'll be more e-waste from retired cell phones being replaced from 5G than all of the predecessor cell phone equipment. That's a hard one for me to wrap my head around, but I think the source is fairly accurate.
Randy, when you say your experience with 5G was phenomenal, what specifically would you point to as the things you noticed the most?
Oh, the speed is so lightning quick, Div, you can't even hardly believe that you can run that fast off of a cell phone or a hotspot. And I'm lucky enough to have 1 gig service in my home, but it really nets only in the 400 to 600 gig range, or sorry, 400 to 600 meg range. Cell phone outruns it. And it's like, okay, so why am I bothering with this cable stuff in my home, right? And I believe that's the way it will turn out, is I think that we'll get to the point that we will just bail a lot of on our wired line pieces. The trick here, Div, frankly, is are the vendors going to charge for data? And that will make the difference. If they basically come up with unlimited data plans at reasonable rates, I think it'll decimate the wired connection industry.
Good. All right, well, let me go ahead and close out the poll here. Thank you folks for bearing with me there. Randy, 67% of people said all of the above, 20% said 5G is available now.
Yep, and it turns out 5G is available now, but the 5G rollout's going to take a while, and it got slowed down pretty notably here in 2020. And you absolutely have to have new smartphones and or hotspots to take advantage of the technology. So all of the above is correct. All right, let's continue, because conceptually now I'm going to turn my attention towards software and some hardware items, and hopefully these will give you some insights. We think the world has changed to an as-a-service world, and you can see I used an asterisk to substitute off the first letter. Most of these services have a recurring charge by user. They can scale up or down, and a common name might be software as a service. Accountants World is software as a service. You can do security as a service. I'm sorry, it's the same letters, but it is. There's platform as a service. There's infrastructure as a service, and you can read, I think, the rest. But I would like to point out that even though you can do client accounting services and client advisory services, I kind of like the CAS with 4 letters in it here. So you're offering client accounting and advisory as a service. We're going to see a lot more things offered in this world as a service, and we think the reason we have more, SaaS type services, more software as a service and other platforms as a services. Revenue recognition comes into play. There's valuation and multiples that are associated with private equity and Wall Street. It's harder to get small business loans, and we'll see if that remains true, but I think it will. The marketplace of sellers have decided they don't really want to sell on a perpetual basis anymore. You get some continuous upgrades, and you have fewer forklift replacements, all pretty key advantages. Now, it turns out if you did cloud as a service hosting, the typical hosting environment right now is $125 to $300 per user per month. And if you've got legacy apps that you have to host, clearly you're going to do it with players like Abacus Next or Ace Cloud or CTROM or Right Networks. However, if you can get your entire environment to run as all SaaS apps, then realistically you don't have the recurring hosting fee, and you can kind of pick and choose. And if you start thinking about the cloud as a utility, you'll have variable costs to get these various services, and it is clear that the big vendors proved that they could scale up during the COVID-19 pandemic. But we also see some cloud convenience and innovative apps, and I'll just pick on a few. Maybe some of these some of you don't. But for example, Facetto Forum, an interesting cloud-based sharing app. Maybe some of you during the pandemic used grocery delivery. Perhaps you have used the informed delivery service from the USPS, where it basically shows you what's going to be delivered in your mail daily. Open Table or Wayfair, which has a lot of augmented reality. Google Photo Scan, oddly enough, because I've been home more, I've been able to visit with my 97-year-old mother, and we've used Google's Photo Scan to take a picture of things in the yard and identify them. And I've used Translate as recently as Monday with our Memorial Day meal, because we were talking about something and wanted to know how it would sound in a foreign language, and then we did the reverse. You've got all sorts of apps like this that are out there that are very interesting and convenient. One more that I'll just call out now, which I discovered in the last 90 days, was Yaboo, which does a very interesting meeting agenda tracking, scheduling, organizing. Wonderful little product out of Holland. So all these software as a services are a big deal. And it really points us towards the end of life that's happening with some of our software that's out there. You know, if you're a Microsoft Office shop, 2010 dies later in the year. Windows 7 has already died. Windows Server 2008 has already died on Service Pack 2. Adobe DC and 11 and all the numbered versions, 10, 9, 8, 7, they're all dead. Thomson's going to end Engagement CS in September. Of course, QuickBooks has had the 3-year life dying all the way through. CCH Document has a 12/31 end of life. We want you to be aware that a lot of these products, you basically are faced with a major upgrade, as opposed to the SaaS approach where you get updated on a regular basis. Some would say continuous, but certainly frequently throughout a year. So if you look at SaaS accounting software, it's clear it has become of age. You know, in the entry-level space, we've got players like Zoho Books or QuickBooks Online or Xero or Accountants World Accounting Power fits here to a lesser degree, but similar Sage 50 Cloud and Gravity software. As you go up market, you get the bigger Acumaticas and Sage Intacct and Dynamics 365, NetSuite and Sage Business Cloud. See, in the old days, we clearly differentiate that the premise-based products had more capabilities, but in the last 2 to 3 years, the feature gaps on these SaaS products have continued to close. Now, Intuit has not closed QuickBooks Online with QuickBooks Desktop. Frequently, I point people to Accounting Power, which has the same or superior features to QuickBooks Desktop at a heck of a lot less money. And with Intuit's strategy to promise profits on their QuickBooks Desktop product lines, we're forecasting an increased cost in QuickBooks Desktop. You've got other competitors like Zoho One that have wrapped all sorts of applications together in a flat billing. And we think those types of vendors have interesting strategies, just like G Suite has wrapped all sorts of applications together. But many of you called Microsoft 365 your critical app. And on April 21st, Office 365 was renamed Microsoft 365. I've included some samples of some of the name changes. I'm still having trouble getting them memorized. But for example, Office 365 Business Essentials is now Business Basic, and Business Premium, which probably many of you are on, is now Business Standard. And the E3, E5 products also translated. So you wind up with these new names, but fundamentally Office 365 is now also a dead product at Microsoft, replaced by Microsoft 365. There are some increases in pricing. For example, the E3 product went from a $24 with archive product to $32. And if you do the full E5, it went from a $35 product to a $57 product. Again, you can look up your own pricing and so forth, but I want you to be aware this is a real big strategy change for Microsoft. They're putting in new search and lots of other capabilities. They're trying to focus more on their Power BI and Power Platform along the way, as well as some of their accounting. And they have incorporated a new forms recognition workflow thing in Project Cortex. So that happened during the May updates in the product. Further, during the COVID-19 pandemic, they used their collaboration center and offsite coordination to scale. And this has been an interesting strategy. Of course, Windows 10 this spring implemented passwordless Notion, and they now have virtual desktops that can be renamed and hosted across multiple environments. They're trying to set it up where Windows 10 will run in their Azure environment. And of course, the Mac OS has been updated a fair little bit, including the ability to run iPad apps on the Mac, which is a big deal. And they've broken up the iTunes into podcast, music, and TV, trying to get a little granular separation. And frankly, I think it's to be able to charge a little bit more for the systems in the future. Well, in the last few minutes we have left together, what I'd like to do is just remind you that there's been hardware innovations happening too. Fujitsu has come out with a new scanner, the 7300NX, a quite gorgeous departmental workgroup scanner. It's really a fine product. The 800R, which is small, almost portable, very strong paper handling, will scan a passport or 5mm thick documents without any problem at all, or stiff cards like the metal cards that you get for credit cards and so forth. It's really a fine scanner. And Fujitsu finally stopped isolating their ScanSnap line with proprietary software and are using the same software all the way up and down their line. So in the past 4 to 5 years, I've spoken against the ScanSnap for this proprietary software. That got eliminated in November. So the new IX 1500 using the standard Fujitsu stuff is a fine upgrade for them. Of course, we know Intel has the market leadership in processors. So we encourage you to look at the i7s and so forth, but they've released their 9th gen products. They're using a lot of these in laptops of all kinds and variety in this first wave of their Athena. Please understand though that there is an unfixable flaw in a lot of the Intel hardware, and there is still no known solution for this backdoor security hole. So I've included some processors in here. So if you're shopping for hardware, you can have an idea of some of the products that might make sense to you, and laid out a little bit about the mobile processors as well as 7 versus 10 nanometer type of technology. Now, there are just a few closing thoughts here. There are companies like ASML that are controlling the chip making industry. That's a big issue as far as supply chain goes. And I would like you to buy business grade products as much as you can in any of your purchases. So I've listed those for you as well. My favorite monitor of the year, hands down, is this HP S430C. You may not be able to tell it, but that's a Windows machine on the left, a Mac on the right, single keyboard. You can drag files from one environment to the other, and it effectively is 2 27-inch monitors in one. It's a fine, superb product, retail $999, and I bought many at the $900 price point. And I want you to be aware of portable displays. They've become hard to buy, but out of Australia, the new Espresso display is quite the find. As the year unfolds, you'll see the new IBM ThinkPad X1 Fold is released, and we'll have new monitors with new higher performance HDR. There's new 1400 level, but 600 for CPA firms tends to be the right HDR level to look at. Well, I'd mentioned the CubeSats because of the SpaceX launch today, but you'll notice they put up 60 satellite payloads May 24th last year, so about a year ago, but again on November 11th and on January 29th, as well as on February 17th, March 18th, and on April 22nd. They delayed their launch that was scheduled for last week, but they're basically putting up a network of systems through their launch vehicles. So the launch payload looks something like this, and they basically have these satellites that are spread out with sails on them that allow them to basically communicate back to the surface. So we're going to see, a lot of innovations in satellite technology. There's 2 other vendors that have now enabled a lot of their capabilities of satellite to cell phone coverage, and that'll be quite the thing. So watch for Wi-Fi 6E and particularly WPA3, which is the new security mechanism there to give us secure wireless networks. Late in the year, you'll see USB 4 arrive in products. I think this will get some delays because we were supposed to see a lot of the products in June, and I think they'll now all roll back anywhere from 90 to 120 days or so. So I've got just a few things in the strange but true category. You can take a look at those, but it's clear that 8K monitors are of age, and my next TV is clearly going to be one of those. You might look for a real tiny mouse here with the ProPoint mouse. It's a delightful little mouse. And it turns out you might even be able to run your entire computer environment from your phone in the near future. This is a DisplayLink setup that's doing that. And I've also included some recommendations for cameras as well as the TV. And, I guess I want to just finish here with these last two slides. It's clear that robots are coming of age, and these agrobots that have been invented by a small robot company in Salisbury, England, are quite fascinating. We're going to see all sorts of innovations like that. As we think about this new world we're working in, we're probably going to have a lot more sanitation needs, but we've gone through a bit of technology together, and if you have not seen the new 3D printed chocolate, that has come to market in 3D printing capabilities. And so there's so much going on around us. I hope our little bit of time together has given you an idea of what's going on. But data is clearly driving business and economy. The change is accelerating. The XaaS means services available in all sorts of time, all sorts of frameworks. And I think that 2020 year is a year of both software innovation and hardware stability. So I know your time's valuable, and I appreciate you spending some of it with me today. So Div, back to you for final cleanup.
Randy, thanks so much for all of your information today. Just a reminder, if you haven't yet downloaded the handouts, please do so. You saw how dense and information-packed this presentation was, and there's even more in the rest of the presentation there as well. So please download the handout if you haven't already done so. Thanks again to Randy for joining us today and sharing his wisdom. I want to thank all of you for joining us as well. And just a reminder, our next expert webinar comes up next week, June 2nd. Joel Greenwald, Esquire, Managing Partner of Greenwald Doherty, with a very timely topic, how to get back to business, reopening the workplace, and rehiring employees in the current crisis. So if you haven't already signed up for all of the 2020 expert webinars, you can go to 2020-webinars.com. And within just a few seconds, sign up for all of the remaining webinars. They're all free, they all offer CP, and just as with today's presentation and Joel's coming up as well, they're all very timely and informative. So thanks again to all of you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time. Also wanted to remind you, the post-webinar survey will pop up as soon as we close out of here. And if you'd like to get more information from Randy as well, that's going to be an option on there as well. I encourage you to do so if that's of interest to you. And we'll look forward to seeing all of you hopefully next week. Randy, thanks again for your time.
Pleased to do it, Div. Good day to all.